From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Live Chat. Paul Mancano and Andy Kostka. Andy, I wish we could be sitting here on December 12th and talk about baseball and talk about the 40-man roster and the starting pitchers that the Orioles could go out and get and the acquisition of Craig Kimbrel. I think we'll get to some of that later on in our show, but I just came from M&T Bank Stadium where the Ravens announced a series of renovations coming for the stadium in the next 3 years. And while all that good stuff is happening across the street, along Ravens Walk, on the other side at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, we're a mere 2.5 weeks away from the deadline for the Orioles to get a new lease done at the ballpark. And still, we are without a long-term lease, something that we were promised was going to come at some point. And Andy, we're still talking about it, and it's still dominating our conversations when it comes to this team.
Yeah, we will still, there's always on-field baseball stuff we will talk about. We will get to that at some point today. But yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. The interesting thing is how close the Orioles and State came on Thursday and Friday to having a deal, going to a vote with MSA and Board of Public Works voting on the lease agreement. Very close. And there was a very, late in the process, Bill Ferguson on the record talked to Pamela Wood of the Baltimore Banner, said how there were things in the lease that gave him pause. That included the development rights that go to the Orioles / John Angelos. Another thing that gave him pause was a Bloomberg report Thursday that said that David Rubenstein of Carlyle Group was interested, or in talks, I believe was the word they used, to acquire the Orioles. So a lot of uncertainty. We do know, two sources with direct knowledge of the call told the Banner that John Angelos called Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, on Thursday night to reassure the governor that the Angelos family was not selling the Orioles. So take that as you will. There's a lot still to be determined in the last, 2.5 weeks now before the December 31st deadline. The lease, I imagine, will get done. They're not going to be a homeless baseball team. They will not be kicked out of Camden Yards on January 1st. Things will most likely be fine, but there is a lot of uncertainty at the same time. And with uncertainty comes questions like this. So if people have questions, we'll do our best.
It's funny because as you were saying that, an email just came across my inbox from a reader that says, "I'm not buying tickets until a new lease is done." So that kind of gets at the frustration that I think a lot of fans are feeling at this point. But I'm glad that you reiterated, Andy, that this is not going to be a homeless team, because that is what Maryland Stadium Authority executives had said, that they're not going to literally kick them out of the ballpark on January 1st if a deal is not done. Yeah. But the fact that nothing has been done, and we've heard promises all along about a long-term lease that is, according to Governor Wes Moore, going to be a home run off the field and on the field. It's going to benefit the community. And we're still sitting here with serious questions about whether a long-term deal will be done. And I think you can be forgiven, and a lot of fans can be forgiven for believing that this deal had already been done, because on the night that the Orioles clinched the American League East championship, an alert came across the Jumbotron that the team and the state had agreed to a deal that was going to keep them in Camden Yards for 30 plus years. And it seemed like, just reading that a new lease was done. But the word lease was never mentioned in that announcement, because it was just a memorandum of understanding, which is non-binding. And so essentially,
I was going to mention that there are some binding MOUs, but this version was a non-binding.
Okay. Yeah. And so that essentially probably put to rest a lot of fans' concerns and a lot of fans may not have followed up to see, okay, it's not actually a lease. There's not actually a deal done in place. It's just the idea that both of these two parties, the state and the Orioles, are going to come together to get something done. So nothing still of substance has happened since then, correct?
Yeah, they reached a they were very close to this going to a vote with BPW and MSA. It's a extensive. I mean, the MOU was an outline of what they wanted. The parties negotiated ever since September 28th, I believe, is when they posted that, or around there. In September they posted the announcement that a lease agreement or an agreement for 30 years was met. That was the MOU. We do know from sources with knowledge of what the deal would have been had it been approved Friday or gone to vote Friday, which it did not. We do know that it would have been it had some interesting parts to it. So it would have been the O's would have 4 years to come up with a development rights plan. Within those 4 years, that's plenty of time to come up with plans, survey the public, find what they want to do to public land, B&O warehouse, the Camden Station, the adjacent parking lots. If the development rights was approved within those 4 years, the lease automatically is extended to 30 years. If it was not approved during those 4 years, the O's would have the option to make the lease only 10 years. So they could make it shorter. So it was the deal that was proposed and almost went to a vote would have been at least 10 years, keeping them in Baltimore, which is obviously not the 30 years, but the development rights is a part that we do know that is a centerpiece of what John Angelos wants in the deal for a new lease. He wants development rights. So you'd imagine that within the 4 years they would do their darndest to get development rights agreed upon. I still, I see a comment, if the deal doesn't happen, do the Orioles move out of Baltimore? I do not believe there's a very realistic option. It takes many. Well, first you have to imagine, we just saw what happened with the Oakland Athletics. That was a long, drawn-out process. The state here is offering a lot for the Orioles. I mean, there's $600 million in bonds on the table. If a 30-year lease is confirmed, they would gain access to that $600 million. To move a team, you would have to have approval from the other MLB owners. It's Camden Yards is one of the nicest stadiums in the country, unlike the Oakland Coliseum. So probably it's going to be tough to convince Rob Manfred, the commissioner, and the owners that this is a move that's worth happening. And also, people keep mentioning Nashville as a potential destination. Well, Nashville is a expansion team destination as well. And Nashville, if they did get an expansion team, expansion franchises pay money for an expansion team that is distributed to Major League Baseball and the other 30 clubs. That would total about $1 billion. And so MLB, it's really not an incentive if Nashville would get an expansion team anyway. Why they would not want to, and this is conjecture on my part, but they would not really want to say no to the potential of $1 billion from an expansion team, because if a team moved to Nashville, they would not get that money. It would not be subject to expansion money. So that's all disincentive for the Orioles to move. I think a deal is going to get done. I wouldn't be that concerned. It's more just confusing at this point and maybe a little disheartening that it hasn't been done. there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that has prevented a deal getting done. And some of that is, Bill Ferguson has admitted, on the record, his reluctance to agree to a deal that, has, the development rights give him pause, and also a potential ownership change gives him pause. So we do know him on the record admitting that, which is good, good for him saying on the record. But so we do know that one. But I doubt he is alone in some pause regarding the deal, even though Wes Moore and John Angelos are obviously on board.
Well, you mentioned the fact that Orioles CEO and Chairman John Angelos did call the governor after the report came out from Bloomberg that billionaire David Rubenstein was interested in acquiring the Orioles. And Angelos told Moore in that call, according to our sources, that the team was not for sale and that the family does not plan to sell the team. But certainly when you see a report like that shortly before you intend to have a new lease deal done, that could give you some pause and could give you some question marks about the long-term future of the team. I know Kyle Goon of the Baltimore Banner wrote a great column about how the flurry of fan comments and social media reactions to that report, that Bloomberg report, showed just how interested fans might be in a potential sale of this team because of exactly the issue that we're talking about, because of the lease question that is going on right now. The fact that Angelos tried to quell those with Moore, I think you can, like you said, you can read into that what you want. But it would not make a lot of sense from his perspective, from John Angelos's perspective, to be selling the team right now, just because of where the team is on the field, the fact that they're trying to get this deal done right now that could benefit him long term. So I know that there's certainly an appetite from fans, but there has to be an appetite from John Angelos to want to sell this team, and it just does not make a whole lot of sense right now for him.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, you have to think there's such things as capital gains taxes. While Peter Angelos, who is 94 and is, not the best shape, unfortunately, he has had declining health over the past couple years with heart condition and dementia. While he is alive, the Angelos family would be subject to capital gain taxes, and that would be about 20%, I believe, of whatever the sale price is. That could be $200 million or more that the Angelos family would pay Maryland to sell the team. That is 200 million reasons not to sell the team yet. So that's a difficult topic to say. It's tough, but it's reality. Once Peter passes away, maybe there would be more opening, because within that first year after he passes away, it changes hands. It would be George's team, which is Peter's wife. Then they would have more of an option, more realistic option to sell the team at that point. But again, we don't really know if that's been floated. That John Angelos wants the development rights, and that if he gets the development rights and he builds things around the stadium, think about the value of this team would only skyrocket even further. Not to say that it wouldn't skyrocket even if he doesn't build anything, he just gets the development rights and then lets a new owner build things. That's possible. If the development rights are in his name, that would be very fascinating. And this is something we don't know. If the development rights go to John Angelos rather than the Orioles, technically the Orioles, the team, could be sold while Angelos controls the development rights around the ballpark. That's something we don't know. We gotta figure that out. It would be very fascinating if that was would be very fascinating if that was a potential outcome.
Yeah.
That's something we don't know. So I'm just throwing things out there at this point. But there's a lot of things out there that need to be discovered and worked out. And obviously, the O's in the state and members within the state are having those constant conversations. They're still having those conversations, trying to find a middle ground. it's not easy. And part of why it's not easy is because development rights are tied into the lease. If you think about last year at this time, the Ravens got their lease done, a lease extension, a couple years before it was even set to expire. That was a lease specifically for the stadium. It did not include development rights or anything like that. So it was a little bit more straightforward. Even that was 57 pages, a lease document. This would be probably twice that, if not longer. It's an incredibly complicated deal. And so it takes a lot. And you have to convince, not just Wes Moore, who is, he has advocated for redevelopment of downtown and has pushed for a new, lease of a long-term lease. You have to convince Board of Public Works, which Wes Moore is one of the three members, and you have to convince the MSA. So it's not a slam dunk right now that it's going to happen, but I imagine it'll get done at least in a short-term extension.
Yeah, and you mentioned what needs to happen over the next coming weeks and days if this is going to get done. And there are several steps involved here. And the reason it wasn't even put up for a vote, I saw a question as we were live on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook from Andrew about saying Camden Yards isn't exactly Fenway, that the areas around the ballpark are few and not particularly developed, and what areas exactly John Angelos and the Orioles would get control of. And the reason, to reiterate, that this deal was held up, a major reason that this deal was held up, and Bill Ferguson expressed his concerns, was that the deal would include the 99-year ground lease. And in that ground lease would go the warehouse, would go a strip of parking, and would go the vacant Camden station, not the current Camden station where the light rail is, but what used to house the Sports Legends Museum right next to the box office at Camden Yards. But we have spent a lot of time in the Banner newsroom trying to define exactly the areas that the Orioles would get a hold of, and it's a little bit murky right now, and I think that's what's holding up some of the negotiations, is because understanding exactly what the Orioles want and exactly where they would take this land from is a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I just want to add on too about the ground lease. Bill Ferguson, when he talked to Pamela Wood from the Baltimore Banner, part of it is it's a 99-year ground lease for those development rights, and the stadium lease would be 30 years. So there's a discrepancy there. Plus, the Orioles would pay $94 million for those 99 years, and you have to think about inflation over that time. That 94 million becomes less valuable over time. That's also an incredibly team-friendly deal, which is obviously part of the incentive for John Angelos to have a team-friendly deal and to spur development downtown, which is his goal. But I believe there is some reticence to agree to a deal that is that long. 99 years is a long time for the Orioles to have it when the stadium lease is for 30 years. So that's something to work out, and it'll be interesting to see if the 99 year for 94 million makes it into the final copy.
Yeah, it sounds like we're talking about a player contract here. Yeah. Shohei Ohtani contract, where the deferred money is what matters and how he's going to get that money over time. But talking about the coming days, what needs to go down, you need approval from both the Maryland Stadium Authority's Board of Directors. You need approval from the Board of Public Works. The MSA board has 10 of the 11 seats filled right now. And they're not scheduled to meet again until January, but they can call meetings pretty quickly. And you need 6 of those 10 members to vote yes to get something approved. And then the Board of Public Works, they don't have an Orioles item on the agenda, and they are scheduled to meet for the final time this year tomorrow on Wednesday. They need 2 of 3. But as you mentioned, the governor is one of those 3. So you think he's going to vote for it if they get it done. It's also the treasurer and the comptroller involved on that Board of Public Works. So things can happen quickly, but there are significant hurdles to be cleared in a short amount of time if a long-term deal is going to get done. And the alternative, like we've said, is going to be maybe month to month. It's going to be a much shorter term deal because they have just 2.5 weeks to get stuff done.
You have to also imagine just quickly on the BPW,
Mhm.
the Wednesday is that, final meeting, but they can call an emergency meeting for the BPW as well. So there is an option still for that to happen before the end of the year. You'd have to imagine, this is conjecture on my part, that Westmore probably would want, he can, 2 of 3 would work, but you'd probably want a unanimous 3-for-3 decision from a political viewpoint. So I'd imagine there's some, there's probably an incentive to have a 3-for-3, unanimous decision there, just from a political, how it looks. So yeah, that's another thing to consider.
Yeah. Anything more you want to discuss on this, Andy, before we turn the page to talk about baseball?
I don't know. I think that's there's a lot to consider. It's an incredibly important. This is the biggest Orioles story, and I think that is, just to riff on it for a little bit. It's they just won the American League East. They just won 101 games. They have the Rookie of the Year. They have Grayson Rodriguez. They have Adley Rutschman. They have Jackson Holiday in AAA. This is a team to be excited about on the field, but some of the off-field things makes it difficult to be a fan, admittedly. And while I'm not a fan, I hear it in my mentions and, hear it in my email. So I sympathize, with Orioles fans, that they have to think about this off-field subject. I would urge fans at the same time to realize that your Baltimore Orioles are not moving tomorrow. And if they do, that'd be really funny. You can play this back on,
tomorrow specifically. December.
Yeah. If they move tomorrow, that'd be tough. But it will get done eventually. Deep breath. But there's a lot to be figured out before it gets done. And so it might not get done before the end of the year, but it's not panic. It's not panic time. The team is not gonna move, at least not tomorrow. I can guarantee it. They're not moving December 13th.
Yeah, we're not going to get the trucks in the middle of the night like.
That'd be hilarious if it did happen. This would be played over and over again.
Hilarious would not be the word that I think a lot of fans would use. But it's there's too much incentive on both sides to get a deal done from both the Orioles' perspective and the state's perspective. It just makes the most sense to get a deal done. And so we do think it will happen. And we're trying to quell those fears while also discussing the significant hurdles that actually realistically do need to be cleared for something to happen. Yeah. Let's talk about Craig Kimbrel.
Sounds great. Yes.
What a transition. The Orioles made the biggest free agent signing in terms of money at the winter meetings in Nashville, which we all had on our bingo card, as Orioles executive VP and general manager Mike Elias said, signing Craig Kimbrel to be their closer for a 1-year, $12 million contract that has a 2025 team option with a $1 million buyout. If they were to pick up that option, it'd be for $13 million. So in total, they're guaranteeing him at least 1 year for $13 million. A 9-time All-Star, 14-year veteran. He's pitched for the Braves, the Padres, the Red Sox, the Cubs, the White Sox, the Dodgers, the Phillies. He has made his way around Major League Baseball. He certainly has an impressive resume. 417 career saves, or 8th all-time. But he's 35, and we saw his struggles, particularly in the NLCS last year, blowing a couple saves for the Phillies. The Orioles are signing him to be their closer while Felix Bautista recovers from his Tommy John surgery. So they are signing up for the full Craig Kimbrel experience. Whether he'll be the closer the entire year or not, we'll see. But he has been used as a closer almost exclusively in his career, and that's the job that he will take in Baltimore.
Yeah, I actually love this deal. It's a sign that the O's are going for it, and they should. They obviously should. They have a roster to go for it, and they needed a closer, or at least a back end bullpen arm. Craig Kimbrel was probably, barring Josh Hader, who Josh Hader would be the top, late inning relief arm on the market. Craig Kimbrel is probably next. So you have to like what they did. They went out and got a high pedigree pitcher. I know people think, maybe he is
Maybe
not
he's washed.
You said it, not me.
Yeah,
He's past his prime. Sure, he's past his prime, but he has a deep understanding of what it is to close baseball games, and you might not necessarily, as the year develops, you have Yennier Cano, you have Danny Coulombe, you have D.L. Hall, who can all help in those situations as well, and you don't necessarily need as much of a veteran presence, because now the young guys are more attuned to what it is to be a major leaguer. But it helps. It's you have a 9-time All-Star in your bullpen. I mean, just picking his brain, and I know from people who knew him in Philadelphia, as in players who knew him in Philadelphia, I've heard nothing but very positive remarks about what Craig Kimbrel brings to the clubhouse. So in that respect, obviously good. Fastball velocity has dipped since his highs of almost 99 miles per hour average in 2017, I believe it was. And now he's about 95, 96 average. That happens with age, but he's still a good pitcher. He unfortunately, has a little bit of wildness. We saw it, I believe he gave up a combined 4 runs between 2 outings in the NLCS. That was rough. But 3.26 ERA overall, 23 saves. He's a good stopgap closer, and he could definitely be another guy that when Felix is healthy for 2025, maybe they like what he did enough that you pick up the option and you have him as a setup guy, mixing in with not counting Yennier out of the setup equation for 2025, but have Kimbrel in that mix. We'll see, but I personally think the move is good. It is not going to be their only move this offseason. You can guarantee it. They should add a starting pitcher. You'd imagine a front-end starting pitcher would be the target. That is what Mike Elias was reluctant to specifically say, an order of the rotation, whether it be a number 1 starter, number 2 starter, that can all be figured out in spring training once pitchers actually perform. Kyle Bradish could be the number 1. He certainly was the number 1 last year, and he was a Cy Young finalist. I think he was 4th or something in AL Cy Young. So definitely, he's worthy of that number 1 claim if you want it, but you'd probably add a starting pitcher as well this offseason. And you could add more bullpen depth. You literally can never have too much bullpen depth.
Yeah. No, I think that's a major need still for this team, because you saw last year, once you got to October, just how much the bullpen needed an extra arm. And part of that was just the unluckiness of the timing of Felix Bautista's injury. If he gets hurt before the trade deadline, maybe the Orioles are more aggressive in going out and getting a closer to replace him, or at least getting a back end of the bullpen guy. But because he got so late in the year, they were just desperate at that point for another righty in particular. They were using Jacob Webb in high leverage situations in the postseason. Jorge Lopez wasn't eligible for the postseason roster, but he pitched significant innings in the month of September, and those did not go particularly well. Shintaro Fujinami, obviously, their trade deadline acquisition, didn't pitch well enough or consistently enough to make the postseason roster. So they needed more arms. I know the rotation depth is the primary concern, but I'd like to go see them go out and get at least one more depth arm. It doesn't have to be Josh Hader, and it probably won't, because they have their closer now. Yeah. But they should, whether via trade or free agency, there's still several relievers, Hector Neris, Wandy Peralta, Robert Stevenson, that I think would make a lot of sense for this team, just to give them an extra arm. You don't right now on paper, the 8 guys that they have, pretty solid. If you slot DL Hall and Tyler Wells into that bullpen, they're in a good spot. Mm-hmm. What you want as many arms as you can possibly get to get through 162. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're sitting at the trade deadline having to cough up significant assets to get somebody that you could have gotten pretty easily during the offseason.
Yeah, and Yeah, I actually wouldn't count out Shintaro Fujinami for a return. Relatively team-friendly contract there, probably another 1-year deal. I know a source close to his free agency discussions say he has heard from multiple teams in Major League Baseball. Nothing concrete yet regarding a deal, but has heard from multiple teams, the Orioles among them. No contract offer or anything like that. Pretty early in his free agency this offseason. But I wouldn't be, shocked that people, around the league, people love his velocity. That's a huge thing. And if they can magically make him throw strikes at a higher percentage, instead of 48% strikes or whatever he threw, and maybe that's I might be doing him dirty there. I think he was a little higher than that. But, if he finds the strike zone, he could be a very good reliever. That's just the issue was, he didn't always throw strikes. But even a guy like him that is kind of more of a wild card. Yeah. You work with him all spring. You have because coming in mid-season there wasn't much opportunity to revamp and things like that. He was immediately thrown into the fire. If you have a spring, maybe you figure out more how to make it more accurate. But yeah, I agree with you that definitely another bullpen acquisition would be prudent. I wouldn't be shocked if it's more of a waiver claim aspect or a minor league deal with a spring major league invite kind of deal. We'll see. I wouldn't be shocked if they go that route because they've had good results in that way too. Yeah, very good results.
Trading for cash considerations, they don't always work. The hit rate is much lower with those. Darwinzon Hernandez was
but then you get Danny Coulomb.
Then you get to Darwinzon Hernandez walked so Danny Coulomb could run. It's the kind of move that Mike Elias has done very well with, and he could still make several of those kind of waiver claims, those kind of trades, minor trades, to get some bullpen help. But I do think they should add at least one more arm to that bullpen. But the rotation is obviously the main concern right now. And I agree with you, Andy. I think that the priority should be a top end of the rotation guy. Doesn't need to be an ace. Doesn't need to be a number one. Doesn't need to start on opening day instead of Kyle Bradish. But somebody who fits in the Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez portion of the rotation is important. Problem is, the Orioles are almost definitely not going to shell out the kind of money it takes to get that guy in free agency. Just looking at what they've done under Mike Elias, they still have not given a multi-year guaranteed contract to a free agent. So until it happens, we're forced to say it's not going to happen. And there are a couple guys out there that would still make sense on that kind of massive contract. Jordan Montgomery is still out there. He is going to command a massive return. Blake Snell is going to get a massive contract in free agency. I just don't think realistically, whether you agree with it or not, I don't think the Orioles are going to be players in either of those markets. So they're going to have to either sign a back end of the rotation arm, like a Michael Lorenzen, or they're going to trade for somebody who is on a rebuilding team, like Dylan Cease of the Chicago White Sox. Somebody out there, Shane Bieber of the Cleveland Guardians. It's probably going to come via trade. That would just be my guess right now.
Yeah, I'm again going to beat the drum for Logan Gilbert. 4 years of team control. The Seattle Mariners have outfield holes, and the Baltimore Orioles have a glut of outfielders. So that to me just it makes sense. And really a lot of the Seattle arms you could probably go for. Another name I think, Paul, you've mentioned before is Mitch Keller from Pittsburgh. The only thing I really know about him is that he absolutely was phenomenal in I believe it was one game or 2 games against, was it? Yeah, no, it was one game against the O's this year. He was phenomenal. And Brandon Hyde, sung his praises, immensely after his outing against Baltimore. So, he could be a he could be a guy in the trade market that you wouldn't have to part with maybe one of the top 3 prospects in your farm system. That would be like a Jackson Holiday, a Samuel Basayo, and a Kobe Mayo. Those 3 you probably would like to hold on to. I mean, Jackson Holiday is
you're holding on.
Yeah, you're holding on to him. And when we asked at the winter meetings, is there anyone you wouldn't trade to Mike Elias? He said, I can think of at least one player, and we can reasonably assume he was talking about Jackson Holiday as the one player he was talking about not trading, for good reason. And at the trade deadline, we know that they took big swings, as Mike Elias said, at the trade deadline. Part of the reason they didn't make some of those deals was because teams started with Jackson Holiday as their requirement to get back, and that was a non-starter. You're just not going to trade a guy that so many things can happen before he makes the majors, but seems like a long-time major league star. Seems like he can be that. Certainly. You don't want to get rid of that. Not to say you want to. Not to say he wants to get rid of a Kobe Mayo, who has a great bat and can play multiple positions, or a Samuel Basayo, but he might be more comfortable with a Dylan Cease to trade a Kobe Mayo, who would be a very attractive prospect for somebody to get in return. But yeah, I mean, Dylan Cease is definitely an interesting guy to go get. Lost you there, Paul, for a second. I was worried.
I'm working with I'm trying to produce this at the same time. So
people don't need production. They just need
our faces are good enough.
No, but but there's a lot of guys out there. I mean, Shane Bieber from Cleveland. Cleveland needs to cut payroll a little bit, so maybe he'd be an option. So yeah, but we'll see. I do think a trade is more likely though for a starting pitcher.
Yeah.
That was my long-winded answer for a trade. More likely.
Mitch Keller is interesting. I'm glad that you brought him up because he has 2 years of team control left. He's still only 28. Mm-hmm. Not a superb ERA last year, 4.21, but high strikeout numbers, almost 10 Ks per 9, and threw a lot of innings. I mean, almost 200 innings pitched last year for the Pirates. And we know that Mike Elias loves his innings eaters. And I think that, Mitch Keller is a higher upside innings eater than somebody like a Jordan Lyles, somebody like a Kyle Gibson that we've seen them go after in years past. The question is, I think if Pittsburgh wants to part with somebody like that when they're trying to capitalize on taking a small step last year, they're trying to build something in Pittsburgh, but maybe he's the odd man out in a rotation that is starting to come into their own right now.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, a lot of names out there. I think it'll be interesting to see now that the biggest, shoe has fallen in Shohei Ohtani. Now that is done with, whether this market will start to move a little bit better and a little bit faster, because that was obviously the big hammer that had to fall. It fell. And there are still significant free agents out there who are going to command $200, $300 million. And maybe the Dodgers are still in play for all of those guys. I mean, Yamamoto is still out there. Snell is still out there. Montgomery, Cody Bellinger still hasn't signed. So until those kind of deals get done, we may see what often happens is the trade market is dependent upon the free agent market. A lot of teams take their swings on free agents, and when they strike out, that's when they start to look at trades. So maybe it'll take a little bit of time. But we do expect the Orioles, and given everything Mike Elias has said, he is going to go out and acquire another starting pitcher for this rotation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would echo exactly what you said. The trades will happen a little bit later in the offseason. Once some of the big name free agents go, you'd expect, trades will start happening then. But it is just to mention Shohei Ohtani. He has to be mentioned. Danielle Allentuck from the Banner pointed out last night that Chris Davis with deferred money is actually making more money in 2024 than Shohei Ohtani, which of course that doesn't count, his, advertisements. I'm sure Shohei is raking in the dollars.
50 million reportedly a year.
Yeah. So he's doing fine. He's not struggling, but it is just incredibly fascinating that according to the Athletic, great exclusive report they had, that $2 million he's going to make, and have the 68 million pushed back so that the LA Dodgers can continue to add. I mean, wow, this man wants a ring. So
yeah, and good for him. I mean, I know a lot of people were saying not good for baseball, but it's good for him, and it's a smart maneuver on his part and the Dodgers' part to try to maximize the championship window that they have with him. They want to get back over the hump. I saw a comment about Michael Wacha, who is a free agent right now because he had a club option that was for $16 million, then a player option for $6.5 million. He's going to be 32 next year. Had a very good year for the Padres, 3.22 ERA, 24 starts, 14-4 record. The contract that was thrown out by a commenter, 2 years, $22 million. I'm not positive he would sign for something like that. I think he's going to look for a little bit more. And just based off the money that we've already seen thrown around in free agency, he could also wait a while because he waited a while last offseason before he signed his deal. So I think he would make a lot of sense as maybe a number 2, maybe a number 3 in this rotation. Maybe you throw John Means in the top of that because you want to just mix up righty lefty. But he's good enough to be slotted, I think, right behind Kyle Bradish, right behind Grayson Rodriguez, or right in the middle of there.
Yeah, the only devil's advocate is he has thrown 130 innings or less for the past couple seasons. So not a workhorse, but maybe the O's don't need a workhorse. They can work with the fact that you have conceivably 6. If you add a guy, you have conceivably 6 starters that are 7 if you want to include Cole Irvin in there as well. You could mix and match. You could skip a start if you really need to. I mean, Tyler Wells, I think commands a look in this rotation because of how phenomenal he was in the first half. And I don't want people to discount Tyler Wells just because he wasn't really a factor in the second half until he was in the bullpen. And he looked great in the bullpen. So maybe he's a bullpen guy, but he was phenomenal as a starter as well.
It's also tempting to think about him in the bullpen because he could be truly a good 7th, 8th inning weapon for Brandon Hyde, because we've seen it when he was a Rule 5 draft pick. We saw him used out of the bullpen, and he was very effective in that role. So I think that it's tempting for the Orioles in that respect.
And DL Hall, you got to think, he is going to kind of build himself up as a starter, which is, smart to do because it's easier to build up as a starter than become a reliever rather than the other way around. Probably we keep thinking of him as a reliever just because of how his stuff plays. I mean, that's a lot of velocity plus a killer off speed that, if you face 4 guys in, a game, that's really difficult for those 4 guys where we have seen in a very limited major league experience. So definitely don't mean to put a broad stroke on him that the second and third time through an order, really, he hasn't really faced a third time through. So really the second time through the order, he has faced more trouble.
Yeah.
So again, that's a young pitcher thing. We saw Grayson with that same thing, or Grayson having the first inning, really go sideways and then buckle down after that. The young pitchers will take their knocks. So a lot, and then you saw how good Grayson was second half. So definitely don't mean to put DL Hall into a box that he has to be a reliever, but I do. You look at him and you think he could be a phenomenal 7th inning guy. Yeah.
And the only question is, how much rope will Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias be willing to give somebody who needs development like that? It comes from a position player perspective too. When a lot of these guys start to come up, we saw Joey Ortiz come up and he struggled and he was sent down. Saw Colton Cowser, the same thing. In previous years, when they were not winning 100 games and they were not in competition for a playoff spot, those guys would have gotten a lot of rope. We saw Tyler Nevin get such an extended look and he never was able to make the most of it.
Good guy, though.
Good guy. But that, that's the kind of spot that they're in right now, is they can't really afford to give too many opportunities and too much of an extended look to guys who are struggling. And so, the short-term need to win games is going to win out over the long-term development in some instances. Not when it comes to their top guys, not when it comes to Jackson Holliday or Grayson Rodriguez or Gunnar Henderson or anybody like that, but maybe some of the lesser prospects.
Well, in that respect, I'm going to pose this question to you, and maybe I'll give thoughts on it as well. But what do you do in the outfield? Because you have 3 starters, Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander. You need a 4th outfielder. You figure that outfield competition is something like Colton Cowser, Heston Kjerstad. Maybe you even have 2 outfielders if you really want to on the bench. Ryan McKenna.
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody in there? Sam Hilliard, I guess, is in the
technically, yeah.
Yeah, is technically an option.
You have prospects who could fill those spots as well.
But I'm just curious on, would you be willing to have a Colton Cowser be your 4th outfielder?
Right.
Is that a position you can have him in?
I think it also depends on whether they believe that Colton Cowser can truly play center defensively. That we saw him. Can. I mean, we saw him used in center a couple times last year, but he's not as fast as Cedric Mullins. Obviously, does not have the great defensive chops that Mullins or Hayes does. And I guess you could say, technically, if Mullins goes down, Hayes is your backup center fielder, but then you're leaving Cowser to deal with an incredibly large left field at Camden Yards.
Yeah.
I mean, if they believe that he can legitimately play center field, then I think you could give him a look at in center field. But then, are you just parting ways with Ryan McKenna? And, if Cowser is your 4th outfielder, we saw how many times last year and the year before Brandon Hyde used Ryan McKenna as an alternate for Cedric Mullins when facing left-handed pitchers. Colton Cowser is a lefty, so he doesn't give you that kind of versatility. If you want to sit Mullins against a lefty, you have to go with another lefty in Cowser. So
then
I don't know.
Do you go out and get Aaron Hicks again, or an Aaron Hicks equivalent? Like a veteran guy that can play center that also has a right-handed bat.
I'm honestly waiting to see what happens with a trade for a starting pitcher, because I think that it's highly likely that the Orioles will deal from their outfield depth in order to get a starting pitcher. Santander is entering the final year of his deal. Hayes and Mullins each have 2 years left on their contracts. I just think, I think Elias is going to be very reluctant to trade Heston Kjerstad or Colton Cowser, but I think we could see some moving pieces with that outfield, and then they'll decide who they go into camp with.
I'm so fascinated with Heston Kjerstad because obviously you love his bat.
Yeah.
And he's a great story as well, just from a journalist perspective, which I know fans don't really care about. But, you love his bat, but I just wonder, he can play right field, but I do wonder if he probably can't command the left field at Camden Yards. It's much too big, and I don't know if he has the defensive ability to, not to, if he's listening, I'm sorry to limit him, prove me wrong, but
no,
I don't know
his entire minor league career.
Yeah. Right? I don't know if he can play left at Camden Yards.
Yes.
And he could probably play a little bit of first as well.
Yeah.
Which gives him some versatility, but then you have Ryan O'Hearn
who
can play right field and first base. So you have a bat there. So I wonder what is Heston Kjerstad's spot?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And he's another guy, because he has such a high ceiling. And because you are set to lose potentially Anthony Santander in a year, who is your biggest power threat in the lineup, Heston Kjerstad and Kobe Mayo may have the best raw power in the Orioles system. And I think the Orioles are very concerned about losing 2 guys with very high ceilings, very high power potential. And so I think the price to get both Kjerstad and Mayo will be very high, because those guys have incredibly high ceilings given how far they can hit the baseball.
Yeah. There was a question, could Heston and Kobe be a good combo for power?
Heck yeah.
Yeah. You have one lefty, one righty in that duo. You gotta love that. Be it, a DH, or maybe they, can play both can play a little bit of first. They could swap positions at DH. I do know that Kobe is practicing right field this offseason too. So maybe they find their way into right field if Santander needs a day at DH, get off his feet a little bit. I would honestly this is something that is probably never going to happen, but I would consider Anthony Santander an extension candidate, because I think what he brings to this team is huge. I mean, he is your everyday power hitter from both sides of the plate.
Yeah,
that is huge, and it cannot be overstated. Excuse me. That what he has done the past 3 seasons as a, pretty much everyday starter, and if he leads the team in home runs, like Santander is a very big part of this team. So I'd be interested in an extension for him, which I know is not everyone's. They see Gunnar Henderson and Jackson Holliday and Adley Rutschman as extension candidates, but I think Santander could be a little bit more reasonable of a price. Still, deserving of a high price. I think he's making projected to make like 12 million or 13 million this year in arbitration. So interesting, but I would look at Santander as a centerpiece of this team. He has been for a long time.
I just think
it's not going to happen because they have too much outfielders. Yeah, they have too many outfielders.
Yeah, I just think that they feel too comfortable with, the futures of Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser that they.
But I think you could trade. The value of trading a Heston or Colton Cowser is huge. You could go get a Dylan Cease if you trade one of those guys, part of a package, and then re-sign Anthony Santander and say, hey, he's going to be our right fielder for the next 3 years.
You could. Yeah. You absolutely could. I think, though, when given two chances and 2 paths, the Orioles will go down the one that will cost them less money. And
correct.
A lot of teams do that, but I think that's the path of lower payroll is Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad. And so that's what I tend to think is going to happen. Yeah. Andy, we've been talking for 50 minutes. We should wrap this up. At AF Kostka is Andy's Twitter handle, correct?
Yeah, that's also my Threads handle. Big Threads guy. Yeah, you can follow me on there.
What's the F stand for?
Franklin is my middle name.
Franklin. Wow. Yeah. Might have to start calling you that.
You can call anyone can call me that. That's fine.
I'm at Paul Mancano, and please follow at All Banner Sports on Twitter as well. And subscribe to the Baltimore Banner. $1 for 6 months, where you can keep up to date on all of this lease news, all of the free agent and trade news of the offseason. And we will have one of these for you, one of these live chats once a week throughout the offseason, every Tuesday at 1 p.m. So thank you so much for everybody who tuned in on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Please share it with your friends. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube as well. Andy, thanks for joining me.
Thumbs down. If you were really disappointed, give us a thumbs down too.
Don't put that in their heads. Put that out there.
Yeah, just get ready for get ahead of the negativity. It's PR 101.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time, everybody.